Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take that stack of sources you shared today. It's all about the news and market updates from Binance Square, specifically for June 10th, 2025. And we're going to dig right in, find those key insights, cut through the noise, really get to what matters for you.
Exactly. Our mission here is to sort of navigate through all these different updates, pull out the most important bits of info, and help you understand what they actually mean, in the bigger picture of crypto today. It's about seeing the connections, finding those signals in the data.
And looking at these sources, it definitely seems like an interesting day. We've got market moves, some whispers about regulation, key updates on specific projects, lots to cover. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start? Maybe the big picture, the numbers.
Yeah, let's do that. The headline numbers really jump out. Sources say the total crypto market cap hit $3.43 trillion today.
Wow. And that's up, what, 4.22% just in the last 24 hours?
That's right. A pretty solid jump. And the fear and greed index, it's sitting at 64.
64, so that's firmly in greed territory.
Oh, yeah. Clearly elevated positive sentiment across the board. And the sources actually flag market rebound as a trending topic, which, fits perfectly with that reading.
Right. And it seems like Bitcoin is really leading the way here, driving a lot of that increase. But the sources also mention quite a few altcoins are described as flying too, or making big moves. We've got Ethereum up 8% this week.
Solana climbing 5% today. DOGECoin adding, 6.6%?
Yeah, and even tokens like SUI and HYPE posting double-digit pumps, apparently.
It's fascinating, isn't it, seeing how broad this positive feeling is? It's not just, the absolute top coins. That enthusiasm seems to be filtering down, which you often see when a rally starts to strengthen.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive deeper into Bitcoin itself then. The sources say it broke past $109,500, leading the charge. What are the technicals telling us according to these sources?
Well, the analysis mentioned points to something called a 3 inside-up candle pattern. For those maybe less familiar, that's generally seen as a bullish reversal pattern. And in this context, the sources suggest it could mean another 8–10% gain is coming. They're setting a next target for Bitcoin at $115,000, maybe even higher if this momentum keeps up.
Interesting. And there was another technical indicator highlighted too, right? Something about the moving averages.
Yes. The gap between Bitcoin's 50-day and 200-day EMA's exponential moving averages. It's widening.
And what does that typically signal?
Usually a widening gap like that is seen as a pretty strong sign of increasing bullish momentum. The trend is getting stronger. The sources connect this to the idea of a support zone. Basically, it suggests that even if we get a pullback, the setup implies it's less likely to drop below a key support level, maybe around $100,000, based on where those EMAs are now.
Gotcha. Okay, shifting gears slightly. The sources also mentioned some interesting moves by companies and institutions regarding Bitcoin, like a UK firm, Smarter Web Company, they bought more BTC.
That's right. They reportedly picked up another 45.32 BTC, brings their total holdings to just over 168 BTC.
So continued corporate buying, even at these higher prices.
Exactly. It kind of signals that ongoing, maybe long-term conviction from some corners of the traditional business world.
And then there was news about a Bitcoin investment startup, Parataxis Holdings, planning to go public.
Yeah, planning to merge with a SPAC Silverbox Corp 4, according to the sources.
A SPAC, Special Purpose Acquisition Company. That's often a faster way to the public market than a traditional IPO, right?
It is. And seeing crypto-focused firms use this route, well, it highlights them finding new ways to get public investment access. Could be a sign of the market maturing, in terms of its financial plumbing.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting for a lot of people listening. With Bitcoin running hot and some alts popping. What about altcoin season? Do the sources give us any clues there?
They do, and it includes a pretty interesting perspective from an analyst named James Wynn. He seems a bit concerned, actually, worried about too much leverage in altcoins right now, and says maybe investors aren't hedging enough with Bitcoin.
Okay, so what's his take?
His view, as reported, is that Bitcoin's dominance, BTCD, its share of the total market cap could actually reach unprecedented levels.
Oh, wow. Me too.
Well, he thinks this could delay a really strong, broad altcoin season. He suggests alt season might only really kick off once Bitcoin's dominance drops back and stabilizes, and he speculates that might even need Bitcoin itself to hit, say, $120,000 to $140,000 first.
Huh. So a potential spanner in the works for the all-season narrative.
Potentially, yeah. It raises that key question about market cycles. Are we still in a Bitcoin-led phase, or is that broad art breakout just around the corner? Wind seems to lean towards the former, at least for now.
Fascinating. So while some alts are pumping today, that full-blown alt season might still be waiting on Bitcoin's next big moves, according to that analysis. Okay, let's switch over to Ethereum then. The sources cover ETH quite a bit too. They mentioned its price stability kind of hinges on getting above $2,750 resistance.
Right, with potential downside to $2,500 or maybe even $2,380 if it can't break through.
But the good news today, ETH prices rose over 8%, hitting $2,700.
Yes, but it's important, as the source points out, that $2,700 level has acted as resistance like 4 times just in the past month.
Ah, okay. So breaking and holding above that is really the key.
Exactly. Crucial for any sustained upward move for Ether.
Now, the other big ETH story highlighted is staking, right?
Oh, yeah. Huge news there. Staking on the Beacon chain hit a new record high. The sources mentioned numbers between 34.65 million and 34.8 million ETH staked.
And that represents what percentage of the supply?
A massive 28.7% of the total circulating supply is now locked up in staking.
Wow. So what's the insight there? What does that tell us?
Well, the interpretation is that more ETH holders are choosing to lock up their assets for yield rather than selling them on the open market, even with the current price action. If you connect that to the bigger picture, it suggests a growing commitment to the network long term and maybe a potential supply squeeze building up. The sources actually contrast this. ETH price up maybe 50% in 2 years, but staked ETH is up 77% in that same time. Shows real conviction.
And this staking surge, it seems definitely linked to all the talk about spot Ether ETFs in the US, especially ones that might allow staking.
Seems very likely. The sources mention REX shares using regulatory workarounds in their applications, and also note analysts are, generally optimistic that the legal hurdles around staking in ETFs can eventually be overcome.
And supporting that institutional interest idea, there's a note about BlackRock's ETH Trust, ETHA.
Right. Apparently, it's been accumulating Ether pretty steadily. The source mentions 23 straight trading days without any outflows, suggests consistent buying pressure there.
Just to add a bit of color from the individual trader side, the sources also picked up on a whale selling 5,002 ETH.
Ah, yeah, the one who bought around $2,580 and sold near $2,626.
That's the one. Made a profit of about $231,000. Just shows, big players are actively trading these moves too. Adds another layer.
Definitely. Markets made up of all types.
Okay, let's quickly touch on some other specific tokens mentioned in the sources. BNB dropped a bit below 660 USDT.
Yeah, showing a narrowed 1.62% gain over 24 hours at the time of the report. So a bit of cooling off there, perhaps.
And a couple others, USDD and TRX related.
Right, the sources give specifics. USDD 2.0 circulation apparently topped 450 million units. And the STRX vault's TVL total value locked that increased from $5 million to $6 million over 11 days.
So continued activity in the Tron ecosystem.
Seems like it. Those specific numbers suggest growth there, sort of independent of the wider market noise.
Now, here's one that caught my eye, a potential launch of an Injective INJ token ETF in the U.S.
Yeah, this is interesting. The detail is that a firm called Canary Capital set up a trust in Delaware named Canary Staked INJ ETF.
Okay, so that's like step
Pretty
one.
much. It's often the first move issuers make before an official SEC filing. Doesn't guarantee a launch, of course, but it's a strong signal of intent. The sources also mentioned Canary previously filed for a TRX ETF with staking, and that there's already a 21 shares INJ ETP, like an ETF trading in Europe, that captures staking yield.
So the idea isn't totally new, just maybe new for the U.S. market. Why INJ, though?
Good question. The sources note Injective markets itself for things like AI agents and tokenizing real-world assets, so maybe that's part of the appeal for an ETF product. And the news seemed to help. The price INJ was up 3.7% in 24 hours, over 10% for the week.
Right. We also got an update on the ZK token unlock schedule from CK Nation. What's the story there? Allocation first.
Yeah. Sources mention about a third, 33.3% of the total supply was allocated to the Matter Labs team and investors.
And the unlocks. When do they start?
Okay, so the big one is June 18th. That's when up to 25% of vested team tokens and 10% of vested investor tokens can be unlocked. That specific June 18th unlock adds up to about 3.6% of the total token supply, roughly 760 million tokens potentially hitting the market.
That's quite a lot at once.
It is. And the sources add that planned monthly unlocks start in July 2025, about 0.8% of the total supply each month. It's 167 million tokens running all the way until June 2028.
So a big initial unlock followed by years of steady unlocks, potential selling pressure to watch there.
Definitely something holders and potential buyers will be tracking. How those recipients manage the tokens will be key.
And just quickly, the last project update. WorldCoin is expanding its human verification, the orb scanning in the UK.
Yep, starting in London on June 12th, then other major cities later, just showing their continued rollout efforts.
Okay, let's pivot now to regulation and the wider macro environment. Some interesting developments reported. South Korea.
Right. The ruling party there proposed stablecoin legislation, the Digital Asset Basic Act. It would apparently let South Korean companies issue stablecoins if they have capital over $368,000.
So setting specific requirements, putting a framework in place.
Exactly. It just shows how different countries are actively figuring out how to handle these assets, integrating them, but with their own rules.
And in the U.S., still focused on stablecoins, but via the Genius Act. What's happening there?
Well, the Senate Majority Leader filed a motion. It's a procedural thing to try and end debate on. Well, ending the debate about the bill.
Right, because the bill itself was rejected before, wasn't it? 6632?
That's what the source says. So this motion is basically a tool to try and force another vote on the main bill, despite that previous rejection.
So the legislative gears are grinding, but it sounds complex.
Definitely. It highlights that regulating stablecoins in the U.S. is not straightforward. Lots of procedural steps and political maneuvering involved.
Okay, and we also need to touch on some political and regulatory context that one source mentioned. We need to report this neutrally, just relaying what the source stated. It notes that under U.S. President Donald Trump's administration, fund issuers have filed for various crypto ETFs, and that the administration promised to ease regulations.
Right, and reporting impartially on what the sources say here. The SEC has apparently voiced concerns about the legality of crypto staking ETFs under current securities law. SEC staff reportedly told REX Financial and Osprey funds their current structures might not fit the investment company definition needed for trading.
But analysts are still optimistic.
The source does mention analyst optimism that solutions can be found despite those SEC concerns. Again, we're just conveying the points from the source material here, not taking any sides.
Understood. Okay, moving to the broader economy. The sources mention economist Nouriel Rubini, often called Dr. Doom, but he's changed his tune.
Yeah, this is quite a shift reported. He's apparently moved from forecasting a recession to having a more optimistic outlook for the U.S. economy.
Really? Why the change?
According to the source, he believes new tech like AI and nuclear fusion will drive major investment and productivity growth, maybe by 2030. He predicts this could boost U.S. GDP growth from around 2% now to maybe 4%, and could lead to high single-digit gains in the S&P 500 by 2025.
And he attributes this partly to policy responses.
The source says he attributes it to the speed of AI fusion effects and also mentions the market's response to policies from U.S. President Donald Trump. Again, just reporting that neutrally, as stated in the source. Okay. He apparently thinks the big risks like geopolitics and debt are manageable now and says he's a realist, maybe pushing back on the Dr. Boom label.
Interesting. And we can tie this back to the market sentiment we discussed earlier, right?
Definitely. One source listed Fed rate cut hopes as a factor boosting crypto. So Rubini's more optimistic macro view, as reported today, kind of feeds into that broader narrative influencing crypto sentiment.
Okay, so lots of positive momentum, interesting developments, but we also have to cover the other side of the coin, the risks, security, scams.
Unfortunately, yes. The sources highlight a pretty major case. 5 members of an international crypto fraud ring confessed.
How much was involved?
A reported $36.9 million scam targeting victims in the U.S. The funds were apparently laundered and sent to Cambodia.
Oh, wow. Do we know how they did it?
The sources give some details. The defendants Joseph Wong, Yicheng Zhang, Jose Samariba, Shengsheng He, and Jingliang Su, they all pled guilty. Their methods reportedly involved using social media, messaging, even dating apps, classic pig butchering style scams to build trust. Then they'd push fraudulent crypto investments.
And the money trail?
They used shell companies, U.S. banks, to collect the initial funds, converted it all to the stablecoin USDT, and then sent it to crypto wallets controlled over in Cambodia. The potential sentences are serious, up to 20 years for Zhang and Wong, up to 5 for the others. It's a stark reminder of how sophisticated and damaging these scams can be.
Definitely sobering. And there was also a specific alert about suspicious transactions on base chain.
Yeah, from Certic Alert regarding a project called Anome. The source details the flow. An attacker apparently used just 0.2 ETH to buy some Binance tokens, moved them to a contract, then used a flash loan to borrow about 44 ETH, worth around $120,000 in something called Anome USD.
And then tried to cover their tracks.
Seems like it. The borrowed funds were reportedly deposited straight into Tornado Cash, the privacy mixer.
So security vulnerabilities, especially with things like flash loans, are still a major risk, particularly on maybe newer or less audited projects.
Exactly. It highlights that constant need for vigilance, especially in DeFi and these evolving ecosystems.
Right, so we've really covered a huge amount of ground today, just from these sources from Juneteenth. Everything from the market pumping, Bitcoin breaking new ground, Ethereum's record staking.
To those regulatory developments bubbling up in South Korea and the US, Rubini's surprising optimism.
And then the harsh realities of major fraud rings and DeFi exploits.
Looking at all these pieces together, not just in isolation, really gives you that fuller, more nuanced picture of what's happening right now in crypto. You see the tech moving forward, the institutions getting more involved, the regulators trying to catch up, the macro backdrop shifting, and yeah, those persistent risks.
It's definitely clear there are a lot of powerful, sometimes conflicting forces at play, pushing things forward, creating opportunities, but also presenting real challenges and dangers.
So yeah, what does it all mean for you, the listener?
Well, here's maybe a final thought for you to chew on based on everything we've just unpacked from today's sources. Given this sheer diversity of news we saw today, you've got record Ethereum staking and ETF hopes right alongside regulatory concerns and pushback. Bitcoin hitting six figures while analysts debate if alt season is even close. A famous economist turning bullish while massive scams are simultaneously being uncovered. How do you personally weigh the significant opportunities against those equally significant risks in the crypto market as it stands right now? Lots to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the sources.